Hi, my name is Haley, and I did my presentation on professional corruption. So, the most common types of professional corruption in law enforcement are accepting bribes, prostitution, illegal drinking, and illegal use of drugs. There are other types of corruption, such as accepting small gratuities, which is kind of the same as taking bribes from other officers, and fixing traffic tickets, like making the fine smaller or maybe giving a warning instead of ticketing like they should. Some reasons contributing to police corruption are community standards, the attitudes of the rank and file, prosecutor and court actions, and others. One way to combat law enforcement corruption is that the police chief must have power to implement wholesale reforms and have political as well as administrative skills. So this means that the police chief needs to have power to respond to different situations that may come up within their time as being the police chief. And they need to not only be able to speak to their officers in an effective way, but also be able to speak to other administrators and other higher up personnel properly. So, a reform plan may include the police chief speaking out, making internal affairs more effective, improving inspections, holding everyone accountable, improving the use of discretion, and controlling corruption through training. So the more training a police officer has, the less likely they are to engage in any form of corruption. In order for the police chief to address widespread police corruption effectively, then they must also have the support of local officials and the media and the prosecuting attorney. One way we can combat police corruption is through higher salaries in general and better legal protections. Also holding the corruption accountable and giving victims justice. So one case study that I did find was about two NYPD officers that responded to a few automobile accidents. And instead of bringing the wrecked cars to a licensed tow trucking and automobile repair business, like that the police had a deal with, they instead brought them to a tow trucking company that was owned and operated by a former NYPD officer, instead of using what I had just described as the NYPD's directed accident response program, which is legally required for them to do so. The directed accident response program requires the NYPD to identify appropriately licensed tow trucking and automobile repair businesses to respond to automobile accident scenes and remove the damaged vehicles. So instead, they did bring it to a tow trucking company that was owned and operated by a former NYPD officer, and in exchange for steering the removal and repair of the damaged vehicles to the former NYPD officer's business, he paid off the two officers with thousands of dollars in cash bribes. So next is professional corruption within the judiciary. One of the most common types of corruption within the judiciary is bribery. Bribes are usually offered by the accused, the litigant, or the lawyer to try to induce the judge to make certain decisions within the case. Payments may also be sought after by the prosecutors or the judges, so they can say, like, if you pay me off, we can make a plea deal, instead of a prosecutor maybe being aggressive like they should be. So for payment, judges will often affect the procedural process of the case, or they can even alter the substance of the outcome. So instead of maybe sentencing someone to 2 years in prison, they just sentence them for a few months and the rest suspended. When corruption happens within the judicial system, it breaks a basic principle of equality before the law and deprives people of their right to a fair trial. So when the judicial system is corrupt, money and influence may decide which cases are prioritized or which are dismissed, which is a very big problem. So a few ways to prevent corruption within the judiciary is to strengthen independent judiciaries, and one way that this might happen would be to appoint independent bodies and public oversight so that they can guarantee that appointments within the judiciary are based on merit rather than favoritism. Another would be to ensure that judicial personnel should be properly trained and should receive fair salaries and pensions, so they wouldn't have to take the bribe, and this would make them less vulnerable to bribery. Another way could be that judges' personal liability for decisions should be limited. This is to protect them from pressure by powerful interests. Also, only credible and transparent investigations should be conducted against them. So I also did a case study for corruption within the judiciary. So there was a judge in Texas that was convicted of bribery and obstruction. This judge's name was Rudy Delgado, and he was a former judge within Texas's 93rd District Court, and before he was removed from office, a justice within the 13th Court of Appeals. He was convicted of 1 count of conspiracy, 3 counts of federal program bribery, 3 counts of Travel Act bribery, and 1 count of obstruction of justice. When he was a district judge, Delgado conspired with an attorney from 2008 to 2016 to accept bribes in exchange for favorable judicial consideration on criminal cases pending in his courtroom. During this investigation that was conducted by the FBI, Delgado accepted bribes on 3 separate occasions in exchange for agreeing to release 3 of the attorney's clients on bond. Once Delgado learned about the FBI's investigation, he attempted to obstruct justice by contacting the attorney and providing a false story about the payments. And lastly, I'm going to talk about professional corruption within corrections. So the most common forms of corruption within corrections are bribes, sexual favors, drugs, cell phones, or to provide inmates with other benefits. Other kinds of prison corruption can involve higher level prison officials. Corruption in prisons causes a lot of problems that go way beyond the mere dishonesty on the part of the employees. Corruptions causes breakdowns in prison security that can lead to inmate escapes and other major problems. Some solutions to fix corruption within corrections could be to more thoroughly search inmates for contraband as they are entering the prison, to use metal detectors more sufficiently, employees being randomly chosen for a pat frisk as they enter and exit the prison, have random canine searches, retain security staff and retrain them for these procedures. And when there are shift changes, have a lieutenant or another high-ranking officer monitor the front gate for these searches. And I also did a case study for this. So Janelle Griffin, who was a former correctional officer, was charged with federal racketeering related to her participation in a scheme to smuggle contraband into the Maryland Correction Institute, Jessup. So this correctional institute was a medium security prison, and the contraband she was smuggling in included narcotics, unauthorized flash drives, tobacco, and cell phones. There were 12 other defendants with this case, 6 that were outside of prison and 6 that were working within the prison system, and she and other people within that 12 did get plea agreements. So these are my sources, and that is my presentation on professional corruption. Thank you.